All right, let's dive into one of the most epic stories in all of history, the spectacular rise and the dramatic fall of the Roman Empire. This is a civilization that didn't just create an empire, it literally shaped the world we live in today. To really get a sense of this, let's start with just one number, 60 million. At its absolute peak, that's how many people we're talking about living under Roman rule. To put that into perspective, that's nearly a quarter of the entire world's population at the time. The sheer scale is just mind-bending. And, a number like that, it just naturally leads to these two huge questions at the heart of this whole story. How on earth did a single city on the Italian peninsula manage to build something so enormous? And maybe the even bigger mystery is, how did something that powerful, that vast, eventually just crumble into dust?
So first things first, let's really picture Rome at its peak. Because, to understand the fall, you've got to appreciate just how high it climbed. This was the era of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. I mean, for almost 200 years, just imagine one single power keeping things relatively stable from the chilly mists of Britain all the way to the blazing deserts of the Middle East. It's wild.
But look, that kind of peace doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It was bought and it was paid for with centuries of pretty brutal, relentless conquest. So the question is, how'd they pull it off? To get that, we've got to rewind a bit and look at the actual Roman blueprint for dominance. And what you see here is that their rise wasn't some overnight success story, not at all. This was a slow, methodical, centuries-long climb. From its legendary founding, through all those chaotic years of the Republic, to taking down their biggest rival, Carthage. And then finally, after all the drama of Caesar's assassination, you get the birth of the empire under Augustus. It was absolutely a marathon, not a sprint.
So what was their secret sauce? What was the recipe for all this success? Well, it really boils down to three key things. First, you've got the military. The Roman legions were these disciplined, professional, almost unstoppable fighting machines. Second, their engineering was just next level. We're talking roads, aqueducts, they literally stitched the empire together with infrastructure. And third, and this part is just genius, their strategy of assimilation. See, they didn't just conquer people, they gave them a path to actually become Roman. They turned former enemies into citizens.
But here's the twist in the story. Even during this so-called Golden Age, this Pax Romana, there were some deep, dangerous cracks already forming right in the foundation. Yeah, underneath all that power and all that glory, trouble was seriously brewing. And this really shows you the incredible contradiction at the heart of the empire. On one hand, you have this idea, right, the propaganda of the Roman peace, stability, law, order for the average person. But on the other hand, for the people at the top, the reality was often a complete bloodbath. I mean, we're talking about a constant vicious cycle of political assassinations, plots, and flat-out civil wars for control. The empire was never ever as stable as it wanted everyone to believe. And, well, those internal cracks, they eventually set the stage for the long, slow collapse. And that's a key point. The fall of Rome wasn't just one single event. It wasn't one bad emperor or one lost battle. It was a perfect storm. A total convergence of crises where pretty much everything that could go wrong did go wrong all at once.
So that brings us right back to the million-dollar question of the collapse. After centuries of just dominating the known world, what finally broke what seemed like an invincible empire?
Okay, first up, relentless pressure from the outside. Just try to imagine defending a border that's thousands of miles long, and it's under constant attack from dozens of different tribes. This endless warfare was just a massive drain on the empire's money and its people.
Then, as if that wasn't enough, came disease from within. Absolutely devastating plagues just ripped through the empire, wiping out huge chunks of the population. And this didn't just kill people, it totally crippled the economy, it hollowed out the army, and it made the simple act of governing a nightmare. So while enemies are hammering away from the outside, the state itself was literally rotting from the inside out. Political corruption was everywhere. The whole system just became bloated, inefficient, and completely unable to deal with the mountain of crises it was facing. And maybe the most tragic part of all, the empire basically turned on itself. Again and again and again, powerful generals would turn their armies not on Rome's enemies, but on each other, fighting these endless, incredibly destructive civil wars to see who would be emperor. They just bled the empire dry of its best soldiers and its last resources. And you can see exactly how this created a devastating domino effect, right? None of these problems happened in a bubble.
The civil wars made it way harder to fight off the invasions. The plague weakened the economy, which made it harder to pay the soldiers. Each crisis just fed the others, creating this vicious feedback loop, this unstoppable cascade that led straight to total collapse.
But here's the incredible thing. When the last Western Roman emperor was kicked off the throne in 476 AD, the story of Rome didn't actually end, not by a long shot. In so many ways, we are all still living in its shadow, surrounded by the echoes of this amazing empire. And I mean, its legacy is absolutely everywhere. The very languages so many of us speak, French, Spanish, Italian, they're direct descendants of Roman Latin. Our legal systems, they're built on the foundations of Roman law. Our ideas about what a republic is, our government, even our monumental architecture, you can trace it all right back to the streets of ancient Rome. And this brings us to our final and maybe most important thought. When you look at the story of a superpower, one that's dealing with overexpansion, deep political divisions, economic strain, and external pressures, you kind of have to ask yourself, are there lessons from Rome's fall that maybe we should be paying attention to today? It's something to think about. Thanks so much for joining us.